My dad co-signed a $200,000 loan for my sister's house, but said he couldn't afford to help me pay for college. Years later, I bought my own home without telling anyone. Then they showed up with bags in hand, expecting a room. I handed them a lease and said, "Rent's due on the 1st." I've always believed in the idea of family as a safety net. Not the kind that coddles you, but the kind that catches you when you're slipping, gives you a push when you need it. I learned early on, though, that in my family the net had holes, and I always seemed to fall through them. My name's Jordan, 31 now, but this started over a decade ago when I was 18 and gearing up to apply for colleges. While other kids in my high school were celebrating acceptance letters and financial aid offers, I was sitting at our kitchen table with spreadsheets and FAFSA forms, trying to figure out how I'd pay for school without dragging my future down in debt. I wasn't expecting a free ride. I worked all through high school. Nights at the movie theater, weekends babysitting, summers doing clerical work at a dentist's office. But college? That was a mountain I couldn't climb alone. One day, I gathered the courage to ask my dad if he'd consider helping me co-sign a small loan. Not even the full tuition, just a portion, enough to help me qualify for better rates. He didn't even let me finish my sentence. He folded the newspaper he'd been reading and said flatly, "Jordan, I just don't think I can take on that kind of risk right now." No anger, no softness, just the cold finality of a door shutting in my face. What made it worse was what happened 6 months later. My sister Lauren, 4 years older than me and endlessly praised for her sense of direction, despite never holding a job longer than 9 months, announced she wanted to buy a house. Not rent, buy. She'd been dating this guy, Trevor, a mortgage broker who talked big about flipping homes and building equity. My parents hosted a barbecue to celebrate her decision, as if purchasing a house at 23 with no stable income was an act of divine brilliance. And then came the kicker. My dad co-signed the mortgage for a $200,000 home. Without blinking, I overheard it at the party. Trevor was bragging about how fast they'd gotten approved. "We just needed a solid co-signer," he said. "Her dad's credit made it smooth sailing." I remember standing there, a plate of potato salad in my hand, frozen like someone had just splashed ice water down my back. I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw the plate. But instead, I just walked out into the yard and smiled for the camera when someone yelled for a family photo, the kind of smile that hides betrayal behind a well-practiced clenched jaw. I didn't say anything that night, or the day after, or the year after. I swallowed it, like I had with so many other things, my dad's excuses, my mom's silence, the way Lauren always got the best of everything, first car, private tutors, dance lessons, even the attic room with the skylight, while I shared a wall with the washer and dryer. Instead of complaining, I worked harder. I picked a state university with a decent business program and got in. I took out loans, picked up a part-time job, and lived like every dollar counted, because it did. I didn't drink. I didn't party. I didn't travel. My graduation photos show a smile, but it's tired and forced, the kind of smile that says, "I survived this." I never once heard my parents apologize, never once heard them acknowledge the disparity. In their minds, Lauren just needed more help, while I was independent. As if independence was a personality trait I was born with, and not something I'd been forced to build brick by brick because I had no other choice. But I never forgot. Especially not when Lauren's house started falling apart. Poor wiring, bad pipes, property taxes they hadn't accounted for. She and Trevor eventually split up, and guess who moved back into the house? My parents. First it was to help with repairs. Then it was just temporary. They never really left. They called it her house, but by the time I was 25, it felt like a family compound. Every time I visited, I felt like a guest on their turf, even though I was the only one actually managing to build something on my own. At 28, I quietly started shopping for my own home. No fanfare, no guess what I did today calls to my parents. I just saved, planned, and closed. It wasn't big, it wasn't flashy, but it was mine. paid for with discipline, sacrifice, and not a cent from anyone else. I didn't even tell them about the closing day. I didn't invite them to see it. I wanted something, anything, that was mine without their fingerprints on it. I didn't know then how badly I would need that privacy, how quickly my quiet success would become their solution to a problem they created. Because 2 years later, they came knocking, not for a visit, not with flowers or congratulations, but with bags in their hands and an expectation that would change everything. It was a Sunday afternoon, late spring. I'd just gotten back from the grocery store and was unloading bags into the fridge when I saw their car pull up. My parents' silver Camry, loaded down with suitcases, plastic bins, a microwave, and a laundry basket that still had my mom's perfume trailing behind it. At first, I thought maybe they were helping Lauren move again. She had a history of chaotic exits, bad landlords, flooded basements, a breakup with a guy who claimed to be a life coach but couldn't keep a plant alive. But no, they were walking up my driveway, and they were smiling, like this was all completely normal. I opened the door slowly, unsure whether to hug them or ask what emergency I hadn't been told about. My dad spoke first. "Hey, sweetheart," he said, like this was just a regular Sunday visit. "We were hoping to crash with you for a little while." "Crash?" I echoed. "What do you mean, crash?" My mom stepped in, smiling that tight, sugary smile she wore when she wanted something. "Just a few weeks," she said, "until we figure out our next move." And just like that, they started walking in. No more explanation, no discussion. My mom set her purse down like she owned the place, looked around and said, "Wow, this is really cozy. You've done so well for yourself." I stood frozen in the kitchen, bag of apples still in my hand, mind racing. I had never invited them to move in. I hadn't even told them I bought this house until last Thanksgiving, when it accidentally slipped out during a conversation about mortgage rates. I remember how quiet they got when I mentioned it. My mom nodded like it was expected, and my dad mumbled something about interest rates being tricky these days. Now they were here, acting like I'd been planning for this all along. Eventually, I sat them down. "You said you need to stay for a few weeks. What's going on?" My father avoided my eyes, rubbing the back of his neck. "Well, Lauren's house needs some work." "What kind of work?" "Structural." My mom jumped in. "There's black mold. The plumber said it's a huge job. They can't stay there while it's being done." I blinked. "They? As in Lauren and you?" "Well, yes," she said. "We've been living with her since last year. It just made sense after Trevor moved out and she had the space." I didn't even know where to begin. So they had been living in her house, the house I indirectly financed, while I struggled through student loan payments and quietly saved for my own place. And now that it was inconvenient for them, they wanted to relocate to my home. "Why not get a short-term rental?" I asked. My dad chuckled, like I'd just made a charming joke. "Sweetheart, rentals in this area are outrageous. We'd be paying through the nose for a tiny one-bedroom. And besides, it's just temporary. We'd be out of your hair before you know it." I stared at them. I felt my jaw lock, my throat tighten. The girl who used to nod and say, "Okay," was still inside me, but I wasn't going to let her speak this time. Instead, I said, "I need a day to think about this." My mom looked surprised, as if she'd already picked out which room she wanted. "We already brought our things. I'll cover the cost of a hotel for the night," I said. I need a minute." They left, visibly annoyed. My dad said, "We didn't expect this kind of resistance from you, Jordan." And that was the moment the wall came down. I sat on my couch that night, just staring at the blank TV screen, heart pounding. Every part of me wanted to scream, but instead I pulled out a pen and started making a list of what I'd done alone, 4 years of college with barely enough to eat, 3 jobs in 2 years to pay down my loans, a car bought in cash because no one would co-sign a home, purchased with my own credit, my own savings, and my own sweat. And then I made another list, Dad's $200,000 co-sign for Lauren Mom, and Dad moving into her house, no questions asked. Their expectation that I'd do the same. because family helps family. They didn't come to support me when I needed it. They came when they needed something again. And that night, I made a decision. If they wanted to live in my house, they would do it on my terms. No more assumptions. No more guilt tripping. The next time they came knocking, they wouldn't get a key. They'd get a lease. By Monday morning, the fog in my head had cleared. My anger hadn't vanished. It had crystallized into something sharper. I wasn't going to be the emotional dumping ground for a family that only knocked on my door when they were drowning. I wasn't a spare room with no boundaries, so I did what I do best. I took care of it. I sat at my kitchen table, opened my laptop, and started drafting a rental agreement. Not a fake one, not a joke. A real, legally binding, month-to-month lease, using a template I found online and adjusted to fit my house. I itemized everything: utilities, house rules, a breakdown of shared spaces, and most importantly, the rent amount. Not inflated, not cruel. Fair market value based on my zip code and square footage. It was the same courtesy any landlord would offer. Only this time, the tenants happened to be the people who'd told me, "We just can't help right now," when I was choosing between textbooks and groceries. By noon, I printed 2 copies, slid them into a folder, and left it on the entryway console. I didn't call them. I didn't text. I let the paperwork speak louder than anything I could have said in a moment of emotion. That afternoon, they came back right on schedule, as if nothing had happened. My mother was already talking about which closet had better lighting for her scarves. My dad asked about the Wi-Fi password. I met them at the door, folder in hand. "What's this?" my mother asked, smiling like it was a menu. "It's a lease," I said calmly. "If you want to stay here, this is what you'll need to sign." My father stared at me like I had slapped him. "A lease?" "Yes," I said, "a lease, with rent, terms, and responsibilities, just like anyone else." "But we're your parents," my mom said, her voice rising like I'd insulted her religion. "And I was your daughter when I needed help with school," I said. "That didn't stop you from saying no." She flinched. My dad's face darkened. "This is unnecessary. We raised you. We're not freeloaders." "Then you won't have any problem signing." Silence. The kind that suffocates a room. "You've changed," my mother finally said, almost spitting the words. "No," I replied. "I've grown up. There's a difference." They didn't sign it that day. They left the folder on the table and walked out stiffly like guests at a party where they'd been served cold soup. I didn't chase them. I didn't apologize. For the first time, I made it clear that my love didn't mean unquestioning obedience. That night, my phone lit up with a text from Lauren. "Wow, so we're charging rent now? Real classy. Don't forget who was always there for Mom and Dad." I didn't reply, because I hadn't forgotten. I remembered all of it. Like the time Dad gave her money for her small business, which turned out to be a failed boutique that lasted 5 months. Or the time Mom loaned her $5,000 to get back on her feet after her 3rd breakup, while I was applying for grants just to afford tuition. Lauren had always been the chosen one, not because she was better, but because she was easier to pity. And pity got rewarded in my family. Independence got ignored. I went to sleep that night feeling something I hadn't in a long time: peace. Not because everything was resolved, but because I finally stood between myself and their expectations and said no more. The next day, my dad called. His voice was calm, tired. "We'd like to come by tonight to talk." I said yes, but I made one thing clear before we hung up. "If you come with pens, because I'm not discussing anything until that lease is signed." There was a long pause. "All right," he said, "we'll bring pens." And just like that, the ground shifted, not in an earthquake kind of way, in a quiet, deliberate way, the kind where power finally returns to the person who never thought they were allowed to claim it. They wanted a place to stay. I wanted respect. Now they'd have to pay for both. They arrived just after dinner. My mom with her lips pressed together in a way that said she'd been rehearsing a speech all the way over, and my dad clutching a manila envelope like it might protect him from what was coming. Neither of them said much when I opened the door. Just a short nod, a hollow, "Thanks for having us," and then they followed me into the living room like strangers coming to tour a rental property. I had the lease laid out on the coffee table, 2 pens beside it. I didn't offer coffee. I didn't soften the moment with small talk or family memories. For once, I refused to be the one who bridged the silence. My mom sat down stiffly, eyes darting across the page. "It's a bit formal, don't you think?" "It's clear," I corrected. "That's the point." She picked up the pen but didn't write. Instead, she looked at me. "So, this is where we are now? After everything we've done for you?" I smiled, but it wasn't the kind she was used to. "Yes, this is exactly where we are now." And for once, she didn't argue. She signed. So did my dad. His hand trembled a little when he passed the paper back to me, like the weight of what he was doing was finally sinking in. "We'll transfer the first month's rent tomorrow," he said quietly. "Thank you," I replied. It wasn't triumph I felt. It was release. Years of holding my tongue, of watching them bend backward for Lauren while telling me to figure things out on my own. It all finally had a boundary around it. And that boundary came with numbers and clauses and legally enforceable respect. They moved in 2 days later, not into the master suite. I gave them the spare room and the guest bathroom. They were renters, not residents. They had space, not control. The first week was awkward. My mom kept trying to play house like nothing had changed, making passive-aggressive comments about my cooking, rearranging pantry shelves, leaving her laundry in the dryer like it was still her home. I let it slide once, maybe twice. Then I sat her down again. "This isn't Lauren's house," I said. "This isn't your place to manage or critique. You're here under my terms. If that's uncomfortable, I understand, but it's non-negotiable." She didn't respond, but she stopped reorganizing my kitchen. My dad kept more to himself. He avoided eye contact most of the time, as if unsure whether to apologize or stay silent. Sometimes I'd catch him lingering by the window, staring out at my modest backyard like he missed something he'd given away. Maybe he did. Maybe he missed being in charge. Or maybe he was finally realizing what it meant to live with the consequences of favoring one child over another. Meanwhile, Lauren wasn't quiet. She texted constantly, long messages filled with outrage and disbelief. "You're taking advantage of them. How dare you treat them like tenants? They're old, Jordan. They're your parents." But never once did she offer to take them back. Not once did she say, "They can come stay with me." I ignored her messages until the day she tried calling me during a client meeting. She left a voicemail, voice thick with sarcasm and spite. "You think you're so above everyone now, just wait. Karma's real. And you're going to end up alone in that perfect little house with no one left to come knocking." I saved the voicemail, not out of pettiness, but as proof. A record of what I was walking away from. Because here's the truth I was beginning to understand. Being alone in peace is better than being surrounded in chaos. And for once, I wasn't surviving a house. I was running it, on my terms. A week later, I added a clause to the lease, 60-day trial period, evaluation at the end. If either party felt it wasn't working, the arrangement would end with no hard feelings and proper notice. I had no intention of being anyone's permanent plan B. Not again. Not ever. At first, I thought they'd push back, that they'd take offense at the 60-day clause like it was some personal insult, another sign I was too rigid or disrespectful. But they didn't. My dad signed it without a word. My mom paused, gave a long sigh, and wrote her name in neat cursive at the bottom. That was the moment I realized something. They were finally starting to understand this wasn't temporary generosity. This was a transaction, a boundary, a line they couldn't cross without consequence. The early weeks were tense but quiet. We passed each other like housemates with different shifts. My dad mostly stayed in the spare room or on the patio with his crossword puzzles and Sudoku books. My mom did puzzles at the dining table, browsed Facebook on her iPad, and offered the occasional, almost grudging thank you if I made enough dinner to share. No yelling, no warmth, just politeness stretched thin. It was strange. Not bad, not unbearable. Just strange to live with people I'd known my entire life and yet barely recognized in this new arrangement. I was their landlord now, whether they said it aloud or not. And while they might not have respected my voice as their daughter, they had no choice but to respect my house. I found myself wondering, late at night, if this was what they had wanted from Lauren's house, too. To feel useful, to stay close to the child they coddled while ignoring the one who'd done everything by the book. But unlike Lauren, I had no intention of giving them the illusion of comfort without consequence. They started to settle in. My mom asked one day cautiously if she could use the blender. Not take it, not rearrange the counter, just use it. Sure, I said, as long as it gets cleaned afterward. She blinked like I'd spoken in code but nodded, cleaned it thoroughly when she was done. Small progress. But I noticed. Still, they made no effort to really talk about it. About the loan they gave Lauren. About the way they shut me out when I needed help. They danced around it like the elephant in the room was invisible. Something they could pretend didn't exist if they just smiled and washed the dishes afterward. Until one evening, 2 weeks in, I found my dad standing in the hallway outside my office. Just standing there, hands behind his back like he used to do when he'd practice speeches for work. I turned from my desk and asked if something was wrong. He stepped in, slowly. His eyes didn't meet mine. "I found the letter," he said quietly. I frowned. "What letter?" "The one you wrote to your financial aid office your freshman year. The appeal. You printed it here once, remember? You left a copy in the printer tray back at the old house." I'd forgotten about that letter. Forgotten the desperation I poured into every word, how I explained my work hours, my family's financial limitations, my GPA, my goals. How I practically begged them not to pull my aid. "You never asked us," he said, "for help." I stared at him. I did. He looked up. "You said no," I continued calmly. "You said you couldn't co-sign. You said it wasn't worth the risk." He winced. We were scared. The economy was bad and Lauren was already asking for help. I nodded. "And you made a choice." He sank into the hallway chair like the air had gone out of him. "We thought you'd be okay. You were always the one who didn't need anything, who figured things out." "That wasn't strength," I said. "It was survival." The words landed hard. I saw it in the slump of his shoulders, in the way he blinked rapidly like someone trying not to cry in front of a room full of strangers. "I'm sorry," he said, voice low, "not just about the loan, about all of it. The college stuff, the house, the way we always assumed." I didn't speak for a while. I let the silence stretch, not to punish him, but to sit in it together, to let the apology breathe instead of rushing to forgive and forget. Eventually I said, "That doesn't change what happened, but it's a start." He nodded slowly. "I know, I just wanted you to hear it." He stood, hesitated, then walked back down the hall. That night, I didn't sleep much. Not out of anger, not even out of sadness, but because for the first time I felt something shift. Not the facts. Those were still etched into every bill, every loan payment I made without them. But the truth had been named. A small crack had appeared in the wall they'd built to protect themselves from guilt. And maybe, just maybe, that crack would let something honest grow. The lease still stood. The 60-day trial still counted. But beneath the formal terms, a different kind of conversation had finally started. One I'd waited most of my life to have. And this time, I wouldn't let it turn into silence again. Days passed in an uneasy cadence, punctuated by the rhythmic beeping of the coffee machine and occasional footsteps in the hallway. The lease still held its weight in paper and ink, a tangible reminder that my home was no longer an extension of my parents' uncontrolled presence. Yet beneath that legal shield, the boundaries I had etched were continuously tested. One cloudy afternoon, I returned home early from an appointment, expecting to sink into the quiet solace of my reading nook. Instead, I found my father and mother huddled over my dining room table. There were repair invoices scattered around, and my mom's voice quivered as she pointed at a long list of items. It appeared they had been discussing renovations to the house, without my knowledge. The irony wasn't lost on me. The repairs weren't urgent, yet my parents were intent on discussing plans to repaint a room or replace a chandelier. Their conversation was laced with familiar tones of entitlement and gentle persuasion that brushed aside logic. I stepped into the room, and the moment our eyes met, silence fell like a curtain. My mom's hand froze mid-air, still clutching a brochure for interior design. My father cleared his throat as if expecting me to applaud their initiative. "Jordan," he began, the word heavy with implication. "We've been thinking. Since we're staying here, wouldn't it be better if we did a few updates to make the place more comfortable?" Comfortable wasn't a synonym for their constant presence. I exhaled slowly and placed a steady hand on the table. "I appreciate that you want to feel at home," I said carefully, "but these changes are not part of our rental agreement. I already set clear terms in writing. Any modifications need to be discussed and approved first." My mother's eyes narrowed, searching mine for signs of compassion that were nowhere to be found. "But we're your family," she whispered, her voice softening into something akin to pleading. "You know we've always cared for you. Can't you show a little flexibility?" I felt my pulse quicken. It wasn't the first time they'd tried to blend familiar language with transactional demands. "Family care isn't measured by unannounced changes or unilateral decisions," I replied, each word deliberate. "If you have ideas for making the space more livable, we can discuss them, but only within the bounds we've both agreed upon. This isn't a blank check for personal upgrades." He shifted uncomfortably, glancing between my parents as if expecting them to fill the silence with exculpations. "We were just trying to help ourselves feel less like renters," he said weakly. "Isn't that what anyone would want?" I shook my head. "I understand the desire to feel comfortable. But you signed a lease that clearly delineates what's acceptable. Any work that affects the property should be first approved by me." The conversation went on like that for several minutes, my voice unwavering, their defenses rising like storm clouds. Finally, my mother placed the brochure down and muttered an apology. "I'm sorry," she said. "I got carried away." But her eyes didn't convey remorse. They conveyed the same quiet insistence I had seen before in every family discussion we'd ever had. Insistence that they were entitled to a say in every corner of my life, every surface of my home. After they left the dining room, I sat there, heart pounding with a mixture of relief and regret, relieved that I had held my ground, yet grieving the loss of the closeness we once pretended to share. The boundaries were necessary. My success was built on independence, on having a place that was entirely, unapologetically mine. But the walls I erected weren't just physical. They were emotional partitions that underscored the decades of favoritism, quiet sacrifices, and unequal expectations. That evening, I met with my friend Marcus for a drink at a nearby bar. Marcus had known me before I became the person who forced his own family to sign rental agreements. Over a couple of beers, I recounted the confrontation. "I don't want to hear any more of their ideas without my say-so," I said, my voice brimming with both conviction and sorrow. Marcus nodded, leaning in. "It hurts, doesn't it? But you deserve to have your space respected. It's not about cutting them off. It's about drawing a line where you stop sacrificing yourself." His words resonated with me. Deep down, I longed for genuine connection, the warmth of a family that understood not only obligation, but also the importance of autonomy. Yet every attempt at closeness seemed to come with strings attached. I remembered too well the arguments over Lauren's house, the the silent dinners where I was treated as an interloper rather than the one who had built my own success from scratch. On my drive home that night, the city lights flickered as reminders of every late night spent working, every sacrifice made to ensure I could have the home I now managed. I recalled the countless times I had set aside my needs for what was labeled family duty. But that night, the city felt different, a symbol of newfound freedom and the heavy cost of that freedom. Over the next few days, the tension in the house became palpable. My parents kept a respectful distance, yet every doorway they passed in my presence was a reminder of the constant negotiations we had to conduct in silence. I started recording brief notes about every conversation, every instance of overstepping, a silent ledger of the cost of living with those who once claimed unconditional love, but now demanded deference to long-held entitlements. I opened a new tab on my laptop each night. One file was a journal, another a checklist of reminders about why I had drawn these boundaries. In one, I listed, no renovations without my approval, no rearranging of household items, a strict schedule for using common areas. I wasn't doing this out of spite. This was self-preservation. I needed my home to be a sanctuary, not just a battleground where past grievances were rehashed like old news. Every rule I set was a stitch in the new fabric of my life, one where I controlled the patterns and designs of my own space. That confrontation in the dining room marked a turning point, a minor but significant fracture in the well-worn cycle of our family dynamics. For the first time, my parents were forced to reckon with the reality that I was no longer their child in need of rescue, but rather an adult with the right to claim respect for something I had painstakingly built. Yet as I went about my day the next morning, tidying up and preparing coffee in my own kitchen, I felt a bittersweet pang. The warmth that once flowed effortlessly between us had become transactional, a series of checks to be cashed rather than hugs to be cherished. As I sipped my coffee, I knew that this was only the beginning. Our interactions were redefined now. They were no longer steeped in the unspoken expectations of the past, but in the cold logic of lease agreements and firm boundaries. I resolved then to continue down this path. I would document and enforce these boundaries, not just as lines on paper, but as principles of my own identity. This was the cost of maturity, the price of gaining what I'd always wanted, a home that was truly mine, where love wasn't measured in dollars handed out or favors returned at the whim of family. And though the road ahead promised more confrontations and uneasy conversations, I was determined to walk it with my head held high, knowing that each step was a statement. I am in charge of my own life, and my home is no longer for negotiation. The days ticked by, and the trial period began to stretch itself thin, like fabric fraying at the edges. We had slipped into a routine, my parents and I, but it wasn't one born of comfort or family rhythm. It was more like three strangers cohabiting under a quiet ceasefire, waiting for someone to flinch first. My mother rarely spoke unless spoken to. She cooked separately, did her laundry during off hours, and began labeling her food in the fridge. Passive-aggressive notes that read, "Not communal. Please respect." Like she was reminding me whose kitchen this was. The irony wasn't lost on me. My father was quieter still. He would retreat to the guest room early in the evening, TV volume just low enough not to be heard, but loud enough to make his presence known. When we crossed paths, he gave a polite nod, and sometimes I'd catch him glancing at me, not with anger, not even disappointment, just recognition. As if he was finally seeing me not as the daughter who always understood, but as the woman who had stopped making excuses for their behavior. There was a coldness now, not from me, I wasn't cruel, but from the realization setting in for them that they couldn't just move through my life with the same entitlement they'd once carried into Lauren's. They weren't the authority here, they were the guests, and guests follow house rules. It all came to a head one Saturday morning. I'd invited a few friends over for brunch, Marcus, Clarissa, and Becca. Just a simple gathering, nothing fancy. I made a French toast bake. Clarissa brought fresh fruit, and Becca brought her usual sarcasm and half a bottle of Prosecco. We sat on the patio laughing, telling stories, catching up on the kind of life my parents had never asked much about. My job, my friends, my growth. For the first time in a long while, I felt like the version of myself I fought so hard to become. And then the screen door slid open. My mother stepped out onto the patio like she had been summoned by some internal alarm. She looked surprised to see us all there. But more than that, she looked irritated. Irritated that she wasn't part of it. "Oh," she said flatly, "you have guests." Becca, never one for subtlety, raised a brow. "Yep, hope we're not disturbing the tenants." I shot her a look. She smirked and sipped her drink. My mom forced a smile, tight and paper-thin. "Well, I was just about to start laundry. The washer's on the other side of that wall, so it might get loud." Marcus leaned in toward me and whispered, "Should we go?" But I shook my head. "Number, you're fine." I turned to my mom. "Could you hold off on laundry for an hour? We won't be long." She looked like she might protest, but something in my tone stopped her. She nodded. "Sure," she said. "Of course." And then she turned and disappeared back inside, leaving behind an uncomfortable silence. Clarissa placed her fork down. That was icy. "She doesn't like feeling left out," I said simply. "She's not left out," Marcus added. "She's just not in charge anymore." That hit harder than I expected, because that was the truth. For years, my mother had orchestrated family dynamics like a conductor, deciding who was favored, who was pitied, who was given grace. She built a reality around Lauren that painted her as fragile and in need of saving. And me? I was the one who didn't complain, the one who made it work, the one who, by virtue of her silence, was punished with responsibility. But that version of me no longer lived here. After brunch, I found a note slipped under my bedroom door, my mother's handwriting, neat, controlled. "We didn't realize we were such a disruption. Maybe we should start looking for other arrangements. Let us know what date works for the move." I stood there holding the paper, unsure whether to laugh or cry. Part of me wanted to crumple it and toss it in the trash. Another part felt the deep, dull ache of everything we'd lost. Not the fantasy of family, but the hope that one day they might show up for me the way they always had for her. I walked down the hallway and knocked softly on their door. My father opened it. My mother was sitting at the edge of the bed, arms crossed. "I got your note," I said. My mother didn't look at me. "You made it clear this isn't our home." I kept my voice level. "It's my home, and I never said you couldn't stay. I said you had to respect the terms we agreed on." She looked up finally, eyes sharp. "It feels like you're punishing us." I nodded. "Maybe it does. But if what you're feeling is even a fraction of what I felt every time I was left to figure things out on my own, then maybe that's the first time we've ever actually been on equal footing." My father stepped in. "She's not trying to punish us, Diane. She's asking us to see her as an adult, one with limits. We've never been good at that." I was stunned by his honesty. My mother looked away again. "I just miss how it used to be." I swallowed. "I don't, because how it used to be nearly broke me." We stood in silence for a while, the weight of old wounds pressing on the room like humidity. I didn't offer reassurances. I didn't promise we'd get back to anything. Instead, I said what I'd been wanting to say since the day they showed up at my door with bins and bags like I owed them something. "You're welcome to stay through the end of the lease," I said. "But after that, we'll need to reevaluate." I meant what I said. This isn't a permanent solution. It never was. And then I turned and walked away. Back in my room, I finally exhaled. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like the outsider in my own life. They had the right to their feelings, but I had the right to my peace. Let them sit with that. I had, for years, and it taught me exactly how to never lose myself again. The last week of the 60-day trial felt like a ticking clock. Each moment weighted with unspoken truths neither of us had the courage or maybe the will to unpack. My parents tiptoed around me in a way that would have once seemed absurd, but now it was a strange kind of validation. I wasn't cruel. I wasn't shutting them out. I was setting the tone, and they knew better than to challenge it again. The air in the house had shifted. It wasn't tension exactly, it was more like mourning, like everyone silently understood that this arrangement had failed, not because of rent or square footage, but because the foundation it sat on was cracked long before anyone signed a lease. They were quieter in the mornings. My dad no longer lingered at the dining table with his coffee. My mom didn't rearrange the silverware drawer or wipe down already clean counters like she had at the beginning. She stayed mostly in their room, scrolling on her iPad or folding laundry no one asked her to do. My father had taken to walks in the neighborhood park, each one a little longer than the last. He was preparing for something. She wasn't. On the 5th day before their move-out date, I found a sticky note on the fridge with a list of essentials they were going to start packing. No signature, no warmth, just a note. It reminded me of when I was 14 and asked for help on a science project, and my mother handed me an old cereal box and said, "Be creative, Jordan." I ended up building a solar system out of kitchen skewers and nail polish. Got a B+. Did it all myself. That cereal box and this sticky note, same energy, same abandonment wrapped in forced encouragement. The night before their final weekend, I sat at the edge of my bed, holding the lease in my hands. Not because I needed to see it, but because I needed to remind myself why I made it in the first place. Every clause, every line, every signature. It was more than just a contract. It was a declaration. I wasn't going to let anyone else rewrite my story again, not even the people who helped write my first chapter. The next morning, my mom cornered me in the hallway. She held a mug of tea and wore the same pink house robe I remembered from when I was 10, the one with tiny embroidered daisies. I used to think it looked like something a queen would wear. Now it looked tired, like her. "We found a one-bedroom not far from Lauren's," she said. "No hello, no good morning." I nodded. "Good." "It's not what we wanted," she added, voice tight. "But it's what you can afford," I said evenly. "That's what matters." She bit her lip. "You're really not going to ask us to stay?" "No." Not a single flinch, not an ounce of regret in my voice. She looked at me like I was a stranger. "You've become so cold." I tilted my head. "Number, I've become clear. There's a difference." My father entered from the living room, sensing the air shift. "We should get back to packing," he said quickly, sparing me the glare my mother was still holding on to. They packed in silence. I didn't offer to help. I didn't hover. I didn't feel guilty. And that scared me. For them, not for me. For the first time, I wasn't trying to be the version of myself they preferred. I wasn't filling a role or apologizing for existing differently. I was just being me. And she didn't like that version. On Sunday morning, the moving van arrived right on time. A clean white box truck with 2 movers and a clipboard. Professional, efficient, unlike the goodbye that followed. They stood at the doorway, bags at their feet, unsure of what they were supposed to say. My mother clutched her purse like it was a lifeline. My father looked down at the floor, then up at me. "Thank you," he said, "for giving us the time." "You're welcome," I replied. He nodded. My mom said nothing. Just stepped out the door like it wasn't slamming closed behind her for the last time. I didn't watch them drive away. Instead, I walked through my house, and felt the silence fill it again. But this time, it wasn't heavy. It was clean. It was earned. Later that night, I ordered takeout, lit a candle, and sat on my patio, alone. And it was glorious. There was no one criticizing my choices, no one asking if I could just make room or let things go, no passive-aggressive sighs in the hallway, no footsteps that made my stomach tighten, just peace. And then my phone buzzed. Lauren. I stared at the screen, her name blinking like a warning light. I almost didn't open the message, but curiosity got the better of me. So, Mom says you kicked them out like some heartless landlord. Real classy. I read it once, twice. Then I blocked her number, because the truth was I hadn't kicked them out. I gave them a choice. I gave them respect wrapped in boundaries. I gave them space. But what they really wanted, what they were always chasing, was control. And I don't rent out control anymore. They chose not to stay under my terms. That's not eviction. That's consequence. And for once in my life, I wasn't the one paying the cost. For weeks after they left, my home felt like it was breathing again. Not just quiet, but liberated. Every drawer stayed the way I left it. Every surface held only the things I wanted to see. I'd wake up in the morning and walk into the kitchen barefoot, coffee mug in hand, and feel like the house was smiling with me. I thought it would take longer to unwind the damage. I assumed I'd spend months wrestling with guilt or second-guessing every conversation, but I didn't. Instead, what arrived was clarity. Waves of it. The kind you don't know you've been needing until it crashes over you and pulls away everything fake. The silence gave me space to remember things I'd buried, not because I couldn't face them, but because they weren't safe to feel while I was still trying to please everyone. I remembered the day Lauren bought her house, how my mother clinked glasses with her at the dinner table and said, "This is what it looks like when a dream comes true." How my father beamed as if he had purchased it himself. I remembered sitting across from them, pretending to be happy, wondering if I was supposed to be ashamed for not having my own keys to anything but a rented apartment. I remembered the night I told them I got into grad school, and my mom said, "That's wonderful, honey, but are you sure it's worth the debt?" And then how, 2 months later, she handed Lauren a $5,000 check for a creative retreat in Bali. I remembered how they used words like investment when it came to Lauren's future and sacrifice when it came to mine. Those memories used to make my throat tighten. But now they made me strong. They were no longer jagged, they were armor. One Friday afternoon, I was organizing the hall closet when I came across an old photo album. One of those thick, sticky page albums from the 90s, the kind that smelled like dust and glue. I sat on the floor and opened it. There we were, my 6th birthday. Lauren holding the biggest gift, my high school graduation. Mom and Dad smiling like they were just proud enough. The Thanksgiving dinner I cooked from scratch at 23, when my mom claimed she was too tired to help, and then criticized the stuffing. Every photo felt like a contradiction. Frozen smiles over bleeding wounds. I closed the album gently and placed it in a donation box. I didn't need those reminders on my shelf. The real memories, the ones that had shaped me, were already etched in my bones. A few days later, I got a letter in the mail. Not a bill, not junk. A real letter. From my dad. It was handwritten. 3 pages. The envelope was creased, like he'd hesitated before mailing it. He didn't open with, "Dear Jordan." He just started writing. I didn't know what I was doing when I signed that loan for Lauren. I thought I was helping. But I see now that helping one daughter while overlooking the other is not love. It's favoritism disguised as support. He wrote about the lease, how it made him feel small at first, how it forced him to confront the kind of man and father he had become. "We raised you to be strong, but we never honored your strength. We just relied on it. And when you stopped allowing us to, it felt like rejection. But really, it was reflection. We were finally forced to see what we'd been taking." He ended with something I didn't expect. "If you ever decide to forgive me, I'll be here. But even if you don't, I'll still be here, trying to be better." I sat with that letter for hours. I didn't cry. Not because it didn't move me, but because it didn't wound me. For once, I wasn't looking for them to fix what had been broken. I had already rebuilt myself. They were just learning how to face what they broke. That night, I called Rachel. "I think my dad is finally waking up," I told her. "Do you want him to?" she asked. I was quiet for a moment. I want him to understand. That's it. Understanding doesn't require access. He doesn't get to walk back in just because he finally opened the door. Rachel exhaled. That's healthy. That's powerful. And it was. The thing about rewriting memories is that it doesn't mean pretending the past didn't happen. It means owning your side of it. It means saying, yes, that hurt. And no, I don't owe you my peace anymore because of what you didn't give me back then. It's the difference between living in a house where you're grateful just to be allowed and living in a home where you decide who gets to come in. And I had made my decision. The next chapter wouldn't be a continuation of the last. It would be mine, written in full, on my own terms. No co-signers, no conditions, just me, and a future I built from the pieces they never thought I needed. It was a rainy Thursday when Lauren called from an unknown number. I knew it was her before I even answered, some gut instinct sharpened by years of history. I let it ring twice, then pressed the green icon, not out of curiosity, but out of readiness. I had no fear left. She didn't waste time. No hello, no catching up. "So, Mom says you're ignoring her now, too." Her voice was tight, brittle, like she thought she was delivering some kind of moral checkmate. I leaned back into my kitchen chair, the soft hum of the dishwasher behind me. She called once. I didn't answer. That's not ignoring, that's silence. Silence means I'm thinking. There was a pause. "They're trying, Jordan." "I know," I said simply. "I just don't think they know what trying really means." Lauren huffed. "You've always been dramatic." I laughed. Not sarcastically, genuinely. It startled her, I could tell. "You know what's dramatic, Lauren? Asking Dad to co-sign a $200,000 mortgage when you had no steady job. Dramatic is letting Mom and Dad bankroll your every poor decision while watching me drown in student loan interest. Dramatic is moving them into your house and then pushing them out when it got inconvenient. That's dramatic. You don't understand what was happening." "No," I cut in. "You don't understand. You've never had to. Because everyone around you always made sure you never had to face the consequences of your own choices. That was your privilege. Mine was learning how to survive without that safety net, and I've decided I like my way better." She went quiet. The kind of quiet that usually precedes manipulation in our family. "They're not well," she finally said. "Mom cries every day." "Did she cry when she handed you the house keys?" I asked flatly. "Did Dad cry when he said he couldn't afford to help me with college, then turned around and signed loan paperwork for you?" Another pause, then bitterly. "You always hold on to things too long." "No, Lauren, I hold people accountable. That's different." I ended the call without waiting for a response. I didn't feel angry or vindicated. I felt clean. The rain outside tapped gently against the window as if applauding the boundary I had just reinforced. I sipped my tea, my thoughts steady. Later that evening, I got a message from my dad. Just a few words. "Thank you for answering her. I know she doesn't make it easy." I didn't respond. He didn't need me to. A week later, I ran into an old family friend, Mrs. Rayner, at the farmer's market. She smiled and said, "I heard your parents moved out. I hope everything's okay." I gave her the truth without embellishment. They stayed with me for a while. We had an agreement. The agreement ended, that's all. She blinked, surprised. "Oh, I thought maybe there was more to it." "There always is," I said. "But that doesn't mean it needs to be explained, because not everyone gets to hear the whole story. Not everyone earns that access." A month passed, then 2. I lived in my house without disruption, without the uneasy presence of people who never saw me as more than the reliable one. I repainted the guest room they stayed in, soft sage green. I replaced the shower curtain. I donated the guest towels they'd used and bought new ones. Not because I hated the memory, but because I wanted to reclaim the space. Rewriting isn't always dramatic. Sometimes it's in the quietest choices. It's choosing the furniture, choosing who gets a key, choosing yourself. One afternoon, I hosted a backyard dinner with friends. Candles on the table, soft jazz playing, clinking glasses, shared laughter. And at one point, Marcus leaned over and said, "You look different lately, like lighter." "I am," I said. "I really, really am." Because I finally understood something I had never been allowed to believe. Being a good daughter doesn't mean being a doormat, and loving your family doesn't mean sacrificing your sanity. Some lessons cost you more than money. Some lessons cost you trust, identity, peace. But if you're lucky and if you're brave, you stop paying. You stop carrying. You stop covering up the cracks and pretending they're character. And when you stop all that, you become the version of yourself they never thought you'd have the nerve to become. Independent, unapologetic, free. And freedom, I'd learned, was never something someone hands you. You earn it, you claim it, and you guard it with everything you've got. Fall rolled in like a whisper. The trees shifted to amber and rust, and the air felt crisper in the mornings. I spent my weekends reorganizing closets, baking things I didn't really need, and taking walks alone, just because I could. I didn't hear much from my parents for a while, and truthfully, I didn't mind. The space wasn't empty. It was sacred. But then came a letter. It was my mother this time. Not a text, not a voicemail. A folded note delivered in an envelope I found tucked between the slats of my mailbox. No return address, just my name. "Jordan, I didn't know how to say this aloud. You always seemed so strong, so certain. I guess I assumed you didn't need softness. But now I know strength doesn't mean someone doesn't still hurt. I was wrong about how I treated you, about how I failed to see you. You didn't kick us out. You protected your peace. I just couldn't recognize that at the time. I'm sorry, truly. Love, Mom. No explanations, no excuses. Just a quiet acknowledgement. Finally. And yet I sat on the porch steps holding that letter like it was an obituary. Because this was the apology I had needed a decade ago, when I was applying to colleges and eating instant noodles 4 nights a week, when I was maxing out my credit card just to afford textbooks while Lauren was being handed checks with nothing expected in return, when I was staying up late doing freelance work after long days in class while my parents called me so independent and lucky to be so self-sufficient. They had confused my resilience for convenience, my maturity for emotional expendability, and this letter, this thin, folded note, wasn't going to fix that, but it meant something, not everything, but something. I kept the letter, slipped it into a drawer beside my old lease forms and financial records, documents of what I had to put in writing just to be taken seriously in my own home. A few days later, I got a call from my dad. He didn't ask for anything. He just said, "I hope you're okay. I know we don't deserve your trust back yet, but we're working on ourselves." That's all I wanted to say. That's what real change sounds like. No demands, no guilt, no strings. Just ownership, and I respected that. I wasn't ready to open the door again, but I wasn't bolting it shut either. Not because they earned a second chance, but because I had earned the right to choose whether I gave them one. And that, more than anything, was the point. The holidays came. My first in a long time without a performance. No forced laughter, no curated guest list, no pretending to be fine around people who only saw what I could do for them, not who I really was. This time, I invited friends. People who loved me for my presence, not my utility. Marcus brought wine. Clarissa made her famous cinnamon bread. Rachel showed up in fuzzy socks and a playlist that made us all dance like kids. We lit a fire in the backyard, passed around blankets and mugs of cider. At one point, I looked around and realized this was it. This was family. Not bound by blood, but by trust. Respect, reciprocity. I didn't tell them about the letter from my mom. I didn't talk about Lauren or the house or the lease. Not because I was hiding it, but because I had finally lived past it. It no longer owned space in my body. Later that evening, while washing dishes with Marcus, he nudged me gently. "You know," he said, "you've built something people envy." I smiled. "A house?" "No," he said. "A life you don't need to escape from." That line stayed with me because for so long I'd been fighting not just for space, but for peace. For a version of life where I wasn't just surviving or pleasing or proving myself, and I had finally found it. I wasn't the daughter they called only when they were in trouble. I wasn't the backup plan. I wasn't the one who could handle it anymore. I was the one who said no, who drew lines, who enforced them, and still showed up, on my own terms, when it mattered. A few weeks later, I visited their new apartment. Not for a sleepover, not for rescue, just a visit, a choice. My father made coffee. My mother offered me a store-bought pie instead of her usual attempt to impress. It was awkward, but real, honest. At one point, my mom said, "I still don't agree with how you handled everything, but I respect that you handled it." I nodded. That's all I wanted. She looked at me for a long moment. I see that now. And that was enough. No tears, no big reunion hug, just clarity, exchanged between two women who finally saw each other for who they truly were. I left after an hour. I didn't feel obligated to stay longer. I wasn't worried about their feelings outweighing mine. I got in my car, drove home, opened my front door, and for the first time in my life, I stood inside that house not as someone defending herself, but as someone who had arrived. This was my home, built without permission, sustained without apology, protected without shame. And anyone who entered it again, family or not, would understand that nothing here was free, not because I was cold, but because I finally understood the value of what I built, and I would never hand it over again, without a key, a boundary, and a reason to believe they deserved either.